The temp nurse limped through the emergency department sliding doors at 6:47 a.m., the Colorado Springs winter still clinging to her jacket in thin crystals of frost. Rachel Torres moved like someone who'd learned to make herself smaller, shoulders curved inward, eyes tracking the floor tiles instead of faces, her breathing synchronized to the rhythm of fluorescent hum overhead. The left leg was worse today. The storm system that rolled down from the Rockies the night before always made it ache, a dull percussion against bone that she'd learned to absorb without changing her gait. Muscle memory held the pain in a box. Muscle memory held everything in boxes. She clocked in at the main desk, nodded once to the charge nurse who didn't look up, and moved toward trauma supply to begin her shift restocking. Cedar Creek Medical sprawled across 6 floors of Colorado Springs healthcare, and Rachel had learned its corridors the way other people learned their own homes, the shortcut past oncology that saved 40 seconds, the storage closet on the 2nd floor where the good trauma shears were kept, the exact angle to approach the medication dispensary to avoid the cameras. Not because she was hiding anything. Because 18 months of keeping her head down had trained her body to move through the world as efficiently and invisibly as possible. Her hands moved across the crash cart with surgical precision, organizing 14-gauge angiocath needles into the upper tray, stacking 4x4 gauze pads with corners aligned, checking the defibrillator charge with a tech's instinct rather than a nurse's protocol. The movements came from somewhere deeper than her hiring paperwork. Somewhere older. Her left shoulder rotated with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times under pressure, muscle memory that had nothing to do with the community college nursing degree she'd listed on her Cedar Creek application. Dr. Gabriel stood 3 trauma bays away, watching her from the physician station with the particular attention of a man noticing something out of place. He was tall, carrying the soft weight of institutional power around his middle, 6-figure salary, medical director title, brother-in-law who was a Colorado state senator. The kind of man whose teeth were too white and whose watch cost more than most nurses made in 3 months. His nameplate read Dr. Marcus Gabriel, Chief of Emergency Medicine, and beneath that, someone had taped a photo from his medical school graduation, his face 30 years younger but already carrying that expression of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in every room. The problem was Rachel's charting. The problem was the way she'd started asking questions during morning rounds about the duplicate orders for cardiac imaging on patients who'd already had full workups. The problem was her meticulous documentation, vital signs recorded in handwriting precise as military formation reports, medication administration times accurate down to the minute, notation of every discrepancy between what the residents ordered and what the patients actually needed. Good charting. The kind of charting that made quarterly billing audits uncomfortable. Torres, Dr. Gabriel said, not a question, just her last name used like a summons. Moment. Rachel set down the trauma shears she'd been checking, stainless steel blades that caught the fluorescent light like teeth, and turned to face him across the stretcher bay. Her spine straightened incrementally. Nothing dramatic. Just the adjustment of someone shifting from private focus to public performance. Yes, doctor. He held a stack of charts. His fingers drummed against them with the rhythm of controlled irritation. Your notes on the Martinez admission yesterday. You questioned the order for repeat echo imaging. The patient had imaging for hours prior. The clinical indication hadn't changed. The clinical indication is that I ordered it. Rachel's jaw-line tightened, a single millimeter of muscle response, the kind of thing only someone trained to read human bodies would notice. She didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Of course, doctor. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere in the distance, a heart monitor beeped its steady rhythm, the sound of a patient whose vital signs were stable, whose life was proceeding on schedule. Dr. Gabriel waited for her to say something more, but she didn't. Rachel had learned 18 months ago that silence was power when you had nothing else to defend yourself with. Silence was armor. Silence was the only tool available to a woman with no official history, no references, no past before she'd walked through Cedar Creek's doors looking for the kind of work that wouldn't ask too many questions. Just make sure your documentation stays in line with physician judgment going forward, he said finally, and it wasn't a request. It was the kind of thing a man said when he was used to being obeyed, and when he expected that the person he was speaking to understood exactly what would happen if they weren't. She nodded. Understood. He turned back to his charts, dismissing her with the efficiency of someone for whom her presence had already become history. Rachel picked up the trauma shears again and continued her inventory, and what he didn't see was how her right hand trembled for exactly 2 seconds, not fear, but the trembling of restraint, the kind of trembling that comes from sitting on knowledge that could explode everything. Restraint that comes from survival. The morning rounds proceeded without incident. 8 patients. 2 admissions. 1 discharge. The rhythm of a hospital moving through its procedures like a body moving through its own circulatory system, efficient and practiced and completely unaware of the small frictions beginning to accumulate in the system. Rachel moved between rooms with her chart, vitals, notation, the small tasks that made up the visible part of nursing, the parts that appeared in official records. It was 9:14 a.m. when they wheeled the stretcher into room 347. The patient was a man in his late 70s, thin the way old Marines got thin, not from age but from a lifetime of discipline that had calcified into habit. Catatonic. Eyes open but unseeing, the way patients looked when their minds had checked out somewhere the body couldn't follow. The intake paperwork read, Colonel James Hendricks, retired. VA transfer. Depression with catatonic features. No emergency contact on file. Rachel did the vitals check herself, blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen saturation, temperature. The procedure was simple enough that she could do it without thinking, her hands performing the mechanical tasks while another part of her mind remained elsewhere. The cardiac monitor showed a regular sinus rhythm. 64 beats per minute. Steady as a metronome. His left hand lay on top of the hospital blanket, and in his right hand, the one curled against his chest, he held something metallic. Tarnished. The kind of tarnish that comes from 18 years of being gripped and then released and then gripped again, metal worn by hands carrying weight that had nothing to do with the object's actual mass. A challenge coin. Rachel's movement stopped. Her breath stopped. For 3 seconds, exactly 3 seconds, the same duration as a tactical pause before engagement, she remained perfectly still, her gloved hand still resting on Colonel Hendricks' wrist, monitoring his pulse, pretending to do what she was supposed to be doing while the world compressed into that moment and that hand and that coin. The symbol was worn nearly smooth, but she could still read it. Still knew it. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Dark Horse Battalion. The same insignia that had been stamped into a coin that had been pressed into her hand by a commanding officer standing over a flag-draped casket, his face grey with the weight of loss, his voice steady as he'd told her that her son had died the way a Marine dies, protecting the men next to him. She completed the vitals check. Recorded them in the chart. 64 beats per minute. Normal sinus rhythm. No distress observed. Her handwriting was steady, though her fingers were cold. When she was done, she reached into her scrub pocket, the left one, where she kept the tarnished duplicate of this very coin, the one that matched this one in every particular except for the name of the man it had been given to, and her fingers brushed against the familiar worn metal. She didn't remove it. Didn't show it. Just stood there for a single breath with her hand in her pocket, feeling the weight of 18 years and 3,000 miles and all the distance between the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. Colonel Hendricks' eyes remained unfocused. The room's fluorescent lights continued their steady hum. The monitor beeped once, marking the passage of another second, another moment in which Rachel Torres held her breath and kept her composure and asked no questions of the universe that had just placed in room 347 the only man she'd wanted to thank and the only man she'd never thought she'd see again. She turned toward the door. She did not look back. Because looking back was the kind of thing that broke cover, and Rachel Torres had learned 18 months ago that her survival depended on staying invisible. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that someone had already noticed. The overhead paging system crackled at 1400 hours, cutting through the shift change chaos like a scalpel through tissue. "Can the temp girl in the blue scrubs please report to the nurse's station?" Rachel stood at the nurse's station. Had been standing there for the past 4 minutes, restocking the medication dispensary. 6 colleagues occupied the same 20 square feet of space, Martinez on the computer, Chen organizing discharge papers, Rodriguez and Patterson reviewing a chart, 2 residents comparing notes on a patient from the morning, and every single one of them suddenly became fascinated by their work. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Nobody looked up. Nobody acknowledged the announcement. Dr. Gabriel emerged from the back hallway with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind of expression a shark wears before it tests the water temperature with blood. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Rachel's monthly rent. His Rolex caught the light as he gestured toward her. "Oh, you're already here. I forget you actually work here sometimes." His voice was smooth, conversational, the tone a man uses when he's about to deliver something sharp and knows everyone's listening. Rachel met his gaze without flinching, her hand steady on the medication cart. "Yes, sir." Completing the 1400 inventory. She kept her voice level, professional, the default setting of someone used to following orders. "That's actually what I need to talk to you about." Dr. Gabriel glanced around, ensuring maximum audience, then lowered his voice just enough to force people to lean in closer. "We'll discuss it privately. My office. Now." It wasn't a request. It was the kind of instruction that carried institutional weight, the voice of a man accustomed to compliance. Rachel finished her notation on the medication log. She'd learned early that documentation was the only protection against men like this, and followed him through the maze of corridors. The hospital at midday shift change was a particular kind of chaos, supply carts rattling, overhead pages announcing codes, nurses calling out lab values, the whole machinery grinding forward with the relentless precision of a military operation. The difference was that in the Marine Corps, everyone marched in the same direction. Here, everyone was pretending not to notice what was about to happen. Dr. Gabriel's office was on the 4th floor, corner position with a view of the city that probably made him feel important. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A mahogany desk that looked like it had been imported from somewhere expensive. 3 diplomas on the wall, medical school, residency, fellowship, each one more impressive than the last, though Rachel had learned that credentials and competence were different languages entirely. He didn't invite her to sit. Instead, he moved behind his desk and gestured toward the supply closet just outside his office door. "Actually, let's discuss this in here. More privacy." The supply closet was a narrow corridor of shelves stacked with 4 kits, bandages, surgical supplies, the anonymous infrastructure that kept the hospital running. Rachel stepped inside. Dr. Gabriel followed and closed the door behind him, his presence suddenly crowding the small space. She could smell his cologne and his coffee breath, a mixture that would stay with her for weeks. He stepped close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "We're missing Dilaudid from the count. Hydromorphone. Funny how the shortages started exactly when you arrived, about 18 months ago." His voice dropped, became conversational in a way that was worse than shouting. "I've been watching you, Torres. Very careful. Very precise. Too precise, actually. Someone who counts twice, signs everything, makes notations in the margins." He smiled. "That's what someone does when they're hiding something." Rachel's jaw tightened. The supply closet suddenly felt very small, very enclosed, and she could feel the old instinct rising in her chest, the one that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments, the one that recognized a threat in body language and tone and spatial encroachment. But this wasn't Tikrit. This was a hospital in Colorado Springs, and the weapons here were different. "Sir, I count every medication twice and sign every log independently. My records will show that. The pharmacy reconciliation is available for audit." Her voice remained steady, professional, the default of someone trained to respond to threat with precision rather than emotion. Dr. Gabriel laughed, a sound like a tank idling in a garage, all mechanical weight and zero warmth. "Your records? Of course. Very meticulous. Almost military-grade meticulousness, actually. If I didn't know better, I'd say you had been trained for this kind of detail work." He paused, watching her face for a reaction. Finding none, he continued. But here's the thing about being this careful, this by the book, this competent. You stand out. And standing out is dangerous in my hospital. The word "my" hung in the air between them like a threat. Starting immediately, you're reassigned to overnight janitorial duties. Facilities management. You'll report at 2300. Clearly, clinical nursing is above your skill level. You can return to pushing mops and filling buckets, that suits your aptitude better. Rachel absorbed this without moving, without changing her breathing, without allowing a single muscle in her face to register what had just happened. A demotion. Public humiliation. Reassignment that would destroy her remaining credibility with the nursing staff, would mark her as someone Dr. Gabriel had deemed unfit for clinical work. The message was clear: comply with silence, or this gets worse. Understood, sir. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. But when she turned to exit the supply closet, she felt something hot and liquid gathering behind her eyes. The second she stepped into the hallway, the sensation released. A single tear tracked down her left cheek, betraying everything her composure was meant to hide. She wiped it away immediately, her fingers quick and efficient, before anyone could see. Before anyone could use it against her. The rest of her shift passed in the autopilot state of someone running on muscle memory and hollow purpose. She completed her rounds, checked vitals, documented observations, moved through the corridors like a ghost passing through walls. By 1900, the evening shift was arriving, fresh and energized and ready for the night ahead. The parking lot was crowded with people transitioning, staff heading home, others arriving to relieve them, that brief window of overlap when the hospital exhaled and inhaled simultaneously. Rachel was heading toward her 15-year-old Civic, a 2006 Honda that ran on prayer and cheap synthetic oil, when Dr. Gabriel's voice carried across the asphalt with the precision of someone using a megaphone. Torres. Wait. She stopped. 20 people heard it. Maybe more. The parking lot fell into that particular kind of silence that happens when something significant is about to occur, when collective attention sharpens toward a single point. Dr. Gabriel walked toward her with the confidence of a man who had never experienced consequences, his suit jacket loose over his shoulders, his posture the casual dominance of someone accustomed to having the last word. I wanted to make sure you understood the scope of your new assignment. Starting tonight at 2300, you report to facilities management in the basement. Overnight janitorial duties. That means floors, bathrooms, waste management, all of it. You'll be working alone, night shift, through the morning. He paused, ensuring every person within earshot understood the depth of the reassignment. Apparently, I overestimated your nursing aptitude. Some people just aren't cut out for clinical work. No shame in that. Everyone has their level. Rachel stood perfectly still. The night air was cold, the kind of Colorado cold that cuts right through clothing and finds the bone beneath. She could feel the weight of every eye in the parking lot, the collective social gravity of humiliation, the very particular sting of being diminished in front of witnesses. A single tear escaped down her right cheek this time, a composure finally yielding to the pressure of 18 months of accumulated insult. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, and then she did something that changed everything. She looked directly into Dr. Gabriel's eyes, not with anger, not with shame, but with something far more dangerous, absolute clarity. When she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that only he could hear it, but something in the delivery made even the people 20 feet away sense that a line had been crossed. My son served under Colonel James Hendricks. 3 tours in Fallujah and Helmand Province. He died outside Tikrit in 2011, saving Marines who were in his unit. I know what real leadership looks like, Dr. Gabriel. I know what real sacrifice looks like. And this isn't it. This is just small. Dr. Gabriel's face reddened, the color moving up from his neck like a thermometer responding to heat. His voice, when it came, was sharp. Your son? I doubt that very much, temp girl. You're nobody. You're just trying to, but Rachel had already turned away. She walked toward her Civic with the limp more pronounced than usual, the injury from a blast near San Juan Valley never fully healed, the kind of permanent physical reminder that some things can't be fixed by time or therapy or pretending hard enough. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She unlocked her car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the steering wheel in the darkness. The challenge coin was still in her pocket. She could feel its weight against her ribs, 1,800 grams of metal and memory, a talisman from a life she was supposed to have buried. Behind her, in the hospital parking lot, Dr. Gabriel stood with his hands clenched, his elegant suit suddenly looking very thin, very fragile. And that was the moment that everything changed. The evening shift at Cedar Creek Medical moved with a rhythm of controlled chaos, monitors beeping in steady polyrhythms, the ventilator in room 347 wheeze-hissing like a patient animal. Rachel Torres stood at the janitorial closet at 11:03 p.m., trading her scrubs for gray maintenance coveralls that hung loose on her frame, when the facilities manager appeared in the doorway. Santos was a stocky man with a scarred forearm and the particular way of moving that came from 18 years as an army medic in places where mobility meant survival. He'd never asked Rachel questions. He'd just watched her work. "You're not pushing mops," Santos said. It wasn't a question. Rachel didn't look up from buttoning the coveralls. "Dr. Gabriel's orders." "I don't care if it's Jesus Christ's orders." Santos stepped into the closet, his presence filling the space like a door closing. "You performed a medication count check yesterday. Found a fentanyl discrepancy Gabriel said didn't exist. You can count pharmaceuticals like nobody I've seen. That's not a temp nurse skill. That's institutional knowledge. That's training." He paused, letting the word settle. "I'm sending you back to the floors. Night assignment. Trauma coverage. We're short-staffed. Gabriel doesn't get to waste a pair of hands that competent because his ego got bruised." Rachel met his eyes for the first time. Santos held her gaze, not challenging, but recognizing. A man who'd seen enough to know that some people carried their past in the way they carried their bodies. "Yes, sir," Rachel said quietly. "Don't sirs me. We're the same rank, were. Just work." Santos turned and left before she could respond. Rachel changed back into scrubs that still carried the copper metal smell of the ER, and walked toward the trauma bays as the clock ticked toward 11:47 p.m. The call came at 11:52 p.m. Code Blue, room 347. Not a page, an actual overhead emergency alert that made every nurse within earshot move toward the trauma sound as if pulled by invisible wire. Rachel heard it from the supply station. She'd been checking inventory. Her hands knew the rhythm before her mind caught up. She was moving, scrubs whispering against her legs, boots hitting tile in the precise four-count cadence that meant cardiac arrest. Room 347 held Colonel James Hendricks, the catatonic Marine who'd arrived 48 hours earlier with a chart that said acute stress response, unresponsive, no emergency contacts listed. The man clutching a tarnished challenge coin whose weight had never left Rachel's pocket for 18 months. His body was convulsing, not seizure movements but something worse, something that looked like the chest itself was trying to escape the ribcage. His face was blooming blue-gray. His oxygen saturation was dropping so fast the monitor couldn't keep pace. Dr. Gabriel stood at the foot of the bed with his hands crossed, watching. The on-call resident, a third-year named Morrison who'd been practicing emergency medicine for roughly 4 months, was frozen at the bedside, staring at the EKG strip as if it contained words he didn't speak. His mouth was open. His fingers trembled as they hovered near the ventilator settings. He looked like a man watching a building burn and wondering if running inside would help. Rachel saw it all in the 3 seconds it took her to reach the bed. Hendricks' trachea deviated to the left. His neck veins were distended like dark rope pulled tight beneath skin. His unilateral breath sounds on the right side were completely absent, but silence in the lungs where air should move. His lips were the color of storm clouds. "Tension pneumothorax," Rachel said. Not a question. Not a request. The voice that came out wasn't the voice of a temp nurse. It was something else, something that had given orders in languages other than English, had moved with purpose in places where hesitation meant death. "We don't know that yet," Morrison said, his voice climbing toward panic. "We need to get imaging, we need to. He'll die in 3 minutes without decompression. He has maybe 2 minutes right now." Rachel moved to the crash cart without asking permission, her hands already reaching for what she needed. The scalpel. The trauma shears. The 14-gauge needle that lived in the emergency equipment tray for exactly this scenario. Dr. Gabriel stepped forward, his tailored suit moving like something that belonged in a different building entirely. "Stand down, Staff Sergeant," he said, and Rachel's spine went rigid because he'd said the rank, her rank, the one she'd never mentioned to anyone at Cedar Creek Medical. His eyes were bright with something like triumph. "You're a nurse. Not a physician. This is Dr. Morrison's call, and his call is to proceed with standard protocol. You're not authorized to perform surgical procedures. You're not even authorized to be making clinical determinations. Security is on." Rachel didn't listen to the rest. She'd trained in places where authority meant nothing and competence meant everything. She'd saved lives under sniper fire by ignoring chain of command and following the only rule that mattered: people who could save people had to do it. She positioned herself at Hendricks' chest, scalpel in her right hand, muscle memory flooding back like a door opening to a room she'd sealed shut for 18 months. Her hands were steady. The trembling she felt was restraint, the tectonic shift of someone holding back a version of herself she'd spent years burying. She found the second intercostal space by touch, located the midclavicular line, felt the ribs beneath her free hand as if reading Braille. The scalpel went in with a surgeon's precision, a small incision, clean and decisive. Blood welled immediately. She set the scalpel down and used her fingers for the blunt dissection, pushing through the fascia, feeling for the pleural space the way a musician finds a key. The hiss when it came was unmistakable, air escaping pressure, the sound of a lung that had collapsed returning to the possibility of breathing. Hendricks' chest expanded. His oxygen saturation climbed, 82 on the monitor, then 87, then 92. Color returned to his face like someone turning up the saturation on a photograph. His eyes fluttered, pupils responding to light, and then they focused directly on Rachel's face with the clarity of someone waking from a dream. "Torres?" His voice was gravel scraped across metal. "Staff Sergeant Torres." Rachel's hands were shaking now, not from fear or exertion but from the force of 18 months compressed into 3 seconds. From being seen. From the past standing upright and breathing in front of her with recognition in his eyes. "Yes, sir," she said, and there was no wavering in her voice now. "You're at Cedar Creek Medical in Colorado Springs. You're safe. You're stable." Dr. Gabriel's face had moved through a progression of expressions: shock, calculation, and finally arrival at something cold and purposeful. He was already pulling out his phone, already photographing the scene, already composing the narrative in his mind before anything else could happen. The scalpel. Rachel's hands. The unauthorized procedure. The violation. "You just performed an unauthorized surgical procedure," Gabriel said, his voice pitched for an audience that wasn't there yet. "That's a gross violation of clinical protocol, scope of practice, and about 15 Joint Commission regulations. This is exactly the kind of reckless behavior that gets patients killed." He turned toward the door. "Security. I need security in room 347 immediately." 2 guards appeared before Rachel could draw breath. Before Hendricks could speak again. Before Morrison could find his voice or the monitor could complete another cycle of measurements. "Escort her to HR," Gabriel continued, his posture regaining its certainty. "And I want incident reports filed under patient safety violation, unauthorized treatment, and equipment tampering. She's done here. Finished. She'll be lucky if Cedar Creek doesn't press charges for practicing medicine without a license." Hendricks tried to lift his head, tried to speak, but the sedation that his stabilizing body finally allowed to work was pulling him down. "Torres? David told me about you, he said you were." His eyes closed. His hand released the challenge coin that fell to the bedsheet. Rachel didn't reach for it. She stood with her hands at her sides as the guards approached with the kind of embarrassed professionalism that came from knowing they were part of a scene they didn't understand. The fluorescent lights above hummed their continuous electric song, indifferent to everything happening beneath them. "I need to document her statement," Morrison said weakly, but Gabriel was already ushering the guards forward. "Security footage will handle documentation," Gabriel said. "And Dr. Morrison, I'll expect a detailed incident report on your desk tomorrow morning explaining why you allowed an unlicensed nurse to take control of a medical emergency." Rachel walked with the guards because the alternative was making it worse. Because Hendricks was stable now. Because some battles couldn't be fought in the moment they arrived. The guards moved her toward the stairwell with the kind of gentle firmness reserved for people in shock, and as they descended toward the administrative offices, Rachel became aware of exactly one thing: the weight of the challenge coin was no longer in her pocket. 18 months of carrying it unmarked, unseen, known only to herself and now to the man who'd commissioned it 18 years ago in Tikrit had meant something other than what she believed. The night shift continued above her, monitors beeping, nurses moving with practiced efficiency, the hospital breathing like it always did. But something fundamental had shifted. The lies were unraveling. The past was waking up. And tomorrow, when people started asking questions they had no framework to understand, everything would change in ways that nobody at Cedar Creek Medical was remotely prepared for. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Rachel Torres, 18 months a ghost, 12 months before that a woman nobody wanted to know about, wasn't afraid anymore. She was, finally, exactly what she'd always been: someone you did not pick a fight with. Someone who had nothing left to lose. The HR office at Cedar Creek Medical smelled of stale coffee and fluorescent desperation. 3 in the morning. The night administrator sat rigid behind a desk that suddenly felt like a bench in a courtroom. Dr. Gabriel had assembled 6 different incident reports in 40 minutes, each one a nail carefully hammered into the coffin of Rachel Torres' career. Unauthorized procedure. Scope of practice violation. Equipment misuse. Insubordination. Falsifying credentials. Patient endangerment. 6 forms. 6 lies. The paperwork sat in a stack like accusations building toward a verdict. "Ms. Torres, these allegations are serious." The administrator's voice wavered, rehearsed. He had no spine and less context. "Until the investigation concludes, we're terminating your employment effective immediately." Rachel sat perfectly still. Not trembling. Not flinching. Just present, like a stone waiting for the tide to change. The patient would have died. Her voice was flat. Data. Fact. A statement of physics. Dr. Gabriel leaned forward, and something flickered across his face, frustration that his weapon hadn't landed. The patient had a qualified physician present. "You undermined medical authority because you're another washout trying to relive glory days you never earned. I've seen a dozen like you. Medics who couldn't hack real nursing school. Hiding behind a medical discharge. Playing soldier." Rachel took one measured breath through her nose. The kind of breath that soldiers take before breaching a door. She stood. Removed her badge from her scrubs, the temporary ID she'd worn for 18 months like a mask. Placed it on the desk between them with the care of someone laying down a weapon. Walked out without another word. The silence was so complete you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing their electric hymn overhead. At 3:30, Rachel stood alone in the basement laundry room of Cedar Creek Medical. The only place open at that hour. The industrial dryer hummed its monotonous rhythm in the corner, and the air hung heavy with the chemical ghost of detergent and bleach. She pulled her scrubs from the return bin, the last set she'd worn, still warm from the dryer. The fabric was soft from 1,000 washings, cotton worn thin by hands that had held lives together for 18 months. She began to fold. Each piece received the same treatment. Crisp corners. Exact thirds. Edges aligned perfectly. The motion was automatic, muscle memory that had nothing to do with nursing and everything to do with survival. She'd folded dress blues this way at Camp Lejeune, back when she had a rank and a unit and a future that extended beyond the next shift. Back when her name meant something other than temp girl whispered behind her back by doctors who would never look her in the eye. The scrub top, worn soft at the collar. Fold. Align. Press. Precision was the language she spoke when words failed her. Precision had kept her invisible for 18 months. Precision had made her hands move through that emergency thoracotomy without hesitation, without doubt, with the kind of certainty that only comes from muscle memory written in combat. And precision was what had just ended everything. She folded the last piece. Placed it in the return bin. Stood in the fluorescent silence, a 41-year-old woman with a limp that never fully healed, a limp that had ended her military career, a limp that now meant she had nowhere left to go. Above her, 17 floors up in room 347, Colonel James Hendricks was awake for the first time in 6 weeks. His chest hurt. His breathing was rough. But he was alive. He was asking nurses about a woman named Torres. About a challenge coin. About why his hands were shaking when he thought about the moment she'd pressed a blade into his chest cavity and saved his life. In the HR office, Dr. Gabriel was filing the final paperwork. His stack of 6 incident reports was locked into the system now. The documentation trail was complete. The narrative was set. And whatever happened next, he would be protected by policy, by procedure, by the institutional weight of Cedar Creek Medical standing behind him like a shield. He didn't notice the automated security flag that had just triggered in a database 2,000 miles away at the Pentagon. But that wasn't the worst part. Rachel's employment file background check, the one every temp nurse has to pass, had routed itself through a classified security system because her old clearance had never been formally deactivated. Staff Sergeant Rachel Marie Torres, DoD security clearance, active. The system flagged it at 4 o'clock Eastern Time. An automated notification routed to a liaison officer at the Pentagon who was already awake, already working, already running operations across 3 continents. He read the flag. He made a phone call. Then he made another phone call. By 9 o'clock, the hospital administrator received an urgent request from the Department of Defense. They wanted a meeting. They wanted to discuss Rachel Torres. They were sending representatives. The emergency meeting convened in Dr. Gabriel's office. The morning sun cut through the windows at an angle that made everything look surgical and bright. Present, Dr. Gabriel, the chief nursing officer, 2 hospital attorneys in matching grey suits, and 3 people who'd walked through the hospital doors 40 minutes earlier without warning. One was a woman in her late 20s with black hair and Rachel's eyes. Her name was Maya Torres. The other 2 wore service dress uniforms, navy blue with ribbons stacked like colored medals across their chests. Dr. Gabriel was mid-sentence about liability and legal exposure when the younger woman stood up. Her voice shook slightly, not from fear but from something harder to name. "Where is she?" Maya Torres said. "Where's who?" Dr. Gabriel frowned. He was still operating in the framework of his narrative, still the victor in the story he'd constructed. "Where's my mother?" "Rachel Torres. I want to see my mother." The room went silent. The fluorescent lights buzzed. No one moved. One of the hospital attorneys whispered something unintelligible. The chief nursing officer pulled up Rachel's personnel file on a tablet with hands that had begun to tremble. She started reading aloud, past the basic credentials that said a licensed practical nurse and temporary staff, deeper into a file that apparently contained things she'd never seen before. Rachel Marie Torres, enlisted USMC 1999. Deployed Fallujah 2004 to 2005. Tikrit 2006 to 2007. The CNO's voice faltered. She kept reading. Multiple commendations for combat medical care, injury notation, oh my God. The uniformed man on the left, his name was Command Master Chief Rains, Navy SEAL Command, his voice like a tank idling in a cold garage, stepped forward. His chest was heavy with ribbons. Senior Rater ribbon. Combat V device. The kind of chest that carried decades of operations classified too high to name. Staff Sergeant Rachel Torres earned the Bronze Star with Valor for treating 12 wounded Marines under direct fire in Fallujah. She earned the Purple Heart after an IED destroyed her Humvee, and she continued treating casualties with a compound femur fracture despite catastrophic blood loss. She earned the Navy Cross, the United States Navy Cross, for carrying 3 wounded Marines across 500 meters of open ground in Tikrit while taking insurgent fire from multiple positions, making 4 separate trips because she refused to leave anyone behind. She was medically discharged in 2008 with full honors. Dr. Gabriel's face had gone the color of hospital walls. The second uniformed man opened a folder. Special Agent Carson, FBI. His eyes were the color of a stormy Atlantic, and they looked at Dr. Gabriel with the kind of certainty that comes from evidence already collected, cases already built. Staff Sergeant Torres was medically discharged in 2008. She rebuilt her life as a civilian nurse. 18 months ago, a joint Department of Defense and Federal Bureau of Investigation Healthcare Fraud Task Force identified Cedar Creek Medical as a primary target for billing irregularities, fraudulent procedure coding, and phantom consultation charges totaling approximately $847,000. We needed someone inside. Someone with medical credentials. Someone with military discipline. Someone with a reason to stay invisible. Someone who could document anomalies without raising suspicion. He pulled out photographs. Incident reports in Rachel's precise handwriting. Billing records flagged and cross-referenced. A documentation trail that was not about her. It was about Dr. Gabriel. Someone who could build a case against you. The room erupted. The hospital attorneys started talking over each other, their voices climbing, their legal exposure suddenly becoming very, very real. Dr. Gabriel stood. His face was red now, not pale. His mouth opened and closed like a fish dying on deck. This is insane. She's a temp nurse who violated. You will address her as Staff Sergeant Torres, Master Chief Rains said, his voice dropping to a frequency that made the walls vibrate, and you will shut your mouth. Maya Torres was crying now, not from fear but from understanding. Her mother had never told her. Not about Tikrit. Not about the Navy Cross. Not about any of it. After her father died, Maya's father, Staff Sergeant David Torres, Rachel's husband, killed in the same explosion that took Rachel's leg, Rachel had just disappeared into scrubs. She'd worked 18 hours a week jobs. She'd kept a security clearance active. She'd rebuilt her identity from nothing, alone, while her only child grew up without knowing who her mother actually was. We called her Temp Girl, the chief nursing officer whispered. Rachel Torres' daughter stood up and left the room. She was going to the basement laundry room. She knew where her mother would be. The basement laundry room smelled like industrial bleach and the ghost of 1,000 shifts. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that peculiar white-gray that made time feel suspended. Rachel folded her scrubs with the same precision she'd once used on dress blues, corners aligned, creases sharp enough to cut, each garment a small act of discipline in a life that had stopped making sense 18 hours earlier. The fabric was still warm from the dryer when her phone rang. It wasn't her personal number. It was the hospital landline. Staff Sergeant Torres. The voice was military, clipped, professional. Not a question. A confirmation. Agent Carson, Federal Bureau of Investigation. You need to come upstairs. Now. The folded scrub top fell from her hands. Hit the tile floor. She didn't reach for it. What Rachel didn't know as she climbed the service stairs, a Pentagon liaison had flagged her background file at 6:47 that morning when the automated security clearance review caught a classified designation that shouldn't exist for a temporary hospital contractor. That flag had triggered a joint FBI investigation protocol. The investigation had been running for 18 months in the background like an underground current, every encrypted message she'd sent documenting Dr. Gabriel's billing anomalies forwarded directly to a federal server. Her meticulous charting, the same charts he'd mocked in the supply closet, had been building a case so comprehensive it needed 6 FBI agents and a hospital administrator with white knuckles to deliver it. The conference room on the 4th floor had windows overlooking Colorado Springs. The morning sun came through at an angle that made the polished table look like black glass. Dr. Gabriel sat in his usual seat, the head of the table, already sweating. Hospital attorneys flanked him like remoras around a shark that had stopped moving. Across from them, 2 FBI agents, a Navy SEAL commander in dress blues, and Maya. Rachel's daughter stood when her mother entered. 23 years old, dark hair pulled back severe, jaw locked so tight you could see the muscle working. Her voice broke on the first word. My mother was Staff Sergeant Torres. The room went so quiet you could hear the air conditioning cycling through the vents. Rachel's hands found the back of a chair. She didn't sit. The charge nurse, Linda, who'd worked with Rachel for 18 months and never asked questions, opened a manila folder with trembling hands. Her voice caught as she read. Deployments to Fallujah, June 2004 to March 2005. Second deployment, Tikrit, January 2007 to October 2007. Medical training completed at Field Medicine Advanced Course, Fort Sam, Houston. Assigned to 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, a dark horse. Linda looked up. Tears were running down her face. Why didn't you tell anyone? The Navy SEAL commander stood. His shoulders moved like tectonic plates shifting. The ribbons on his chest told stories that would take hours to explain. He spoke Rachel's decorations like he was honoring the dead. Bronze star with Valor. He paused. Let it breathe. Purple heart. Another pause. Longer. And a Navy Cross. For carrying 3 wounded Marines across 500 meters of open fire in Tikrit. For staying when every tactical assessment said leave them. For refusing extraction until all personnel were secure. He looked at Rachel. We don't forget that. Ever. Dr. Gabriel's face had gone the color of spoiled milk. He pushed back from the table. This is insane. I want my attorney present. This is some kind of... You have attorneys, Agent Carson said. He was tall, federal in the way that transcended uniform. Multiple ones coming. Right now I'm going to explain what happens next. He opened a tablet. 18 months ago, Staff Sergeant Torres was placed at Cedar Creek Medical as part of a joint investigation into healthcare fraud. Inflated procedure codes. Phantom consultations. Kickbacks from medical device suppliers. Total fraud amount, $2.3 million. The number hung in the air like a physical object. Every anomaly she documented went straight to us. Every billing code she questioned. Every duplicate order flagged. Your hospital was running a criminal enterprise, Dr. Gabriel, and this Marine caught you. Carson's voice didn't change inflection. You should have been careful who you tried to destroy. Dr. Gabriel lunged for his computer, the desktop unit on the side table where he checked patient records during rounds. His fingers flew across the keyboard with the desperation of a man understanding his entire life was disassembling in real time. He was pulling up the incident reports from last night, the ones he'd filed against Rachel, the ones he needed to alter, to add details about her being unstable, erratic, a security threat herself. If he could just modify them, change the timestamps, fabricate a pattern of reckless behavior, maybe he could flip the narrative before it solidified into something federal. He didn't know the FBI had installed keystroke logging software on his workstation 3 weeks earlier. Agent Carson watched the tablet in his hand without looking at the screen. His jaw tightened. Dr. Gabriel, step away from the computer. I'm just documenting. You're altering federal evidence. 2 more FBI agents entered from the adjacent room. They moved with the practiced efficiency of people trained for exactly this moment. The sound they made was all motion, no noise, controlled, precise, the way violence sounds when it's completely professional. At 9:47 you accessed incident report IR is 2847 and changed the timestamp, Carson said, reading from his tablet. At 9:48 you added false notes to patient safety documentation. At 9:49 you attempted to backdate a formal complaint against Staff Sergeant Torres to retroactively cover your tracks. Dr. Gabriel lunged for the delete key. The agents were faster. Hands closed around his upper arms, not rough, not theatrical, just firm and immovable. His shoes scraped against the tile floor as they moved him away from the desk. David Gabriel, you're under arrest for healthcare fraud, insurance fraud, wire fraud, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. The handcuffs clicked with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. He started shouting about persecution, about being set up, about a lying temp nurse who'd fabricated everything. His voice echoed off the hospital walls as they walked him through the corridors, past the nurse's station where he'd called her the temp girl, past the supply closets where he'd threatened her employment, past the parking lot entrance where he'd demoted her to janitorial duties. Local news cameras were waiting in the lobby. Someone had tipped them. The perp walk was caught from 3 angles, broadcast on the 6 o'clock news, shared across every local outlet by 9. Dr. Gabriel in handcuffs, shouting his denials, his authority evaporating like sweat in air conditioning. Agent Carson told him he had the right to remain silent and perhaps should use it. 6 months later, Rachel Torres walked through the main entrance of Cedar Creek Medical wearing a pressed navy blazer, her limp barely noticeable. The security guard checking badges looked up from his tablet, then scrambled to his feet. It was a reflex, respect for authority, recognition of someone who moved like they belonged in command. Dr. Gabriel. Stripped of his medical license. Bankrupt from legal fees and restitution. Unable to find any professional work that would have him. The only job available was the one he'd taken, night security guard at the hospital he'd once run, checking badges at the entrance, wearing an ill-fitting uniform with a name tag that said D. Gabriel, the expression of a man who understood completely what he'd lost. Rachel paused at his desk. Nodded politely. Good morning. He couldn't meet her eyes. Upstairs, her office door read Rachel Torres, Director of Emergency Services. The nameplate had taken 3 weeks to install. Inside, mounted in a shadow box on the wall behind her desk, 2 tarnished challenge coins side by side. One had been hers since Tikrit. One was Colonel Hendricks, which he'd pressed into her hand during the small ceremony where Cedar Creek formally apologized, where her daughter finally heard the stories Rachel had never been able to tell, where Master Chief Rains presented her with a framed citation and said the Corps never forgot its own. Maya had asked to read something aloud that day. A letter. The one Colonel Hendricks had written 18 years earlier, the one Rachel had kept sealed in a drawer since the day her son died. It explained how Staff Sergeant David Torres had stayed in an ambush when every Marine had orders to fall back, how he'd covered his unit's withdrawal with suppressive fire despite being exposed, how he'd refused to leave until the last man was clear. How he'd died the way he'd lived, with his Marines. How his mother was the toughest person Colonel Hendricks had ever known, and that toughness ran in the family. When Maya finished reading, there wasn't a sound in the room. Not even the air conditioning. Rachel sat at her desk now, reviewing the new protocol she'd implemented. Better nurse-to-patient ratios. Transparent billing oversight. A peer review system that protected whistleblowers. Her phone buzzed, Maya, checking in like she did every morning, rebuilding what 18 months of silence had broken. Outside her window, the parking lot where Dr. Gabriel had tried to destroy her was filled with cars belonging to staff who called her Director Torres, who asked her advice, who'd stopped seeing her as invisible. Through the hospital, whispered conversations tracked her movements. That's her. The one who took down Gabriel. Marine. Navy Cross. Rachel smiled slightly. She'd spent 15 years hiding, ashamed of losing her military career, believing she was broken. But the truth was different. She wasn't hiding. She'd been reloading. Waiting for the moment when her skills would matter again. When staying quiet would become the most powerful choice. Later that afternoon, she walked the ER floor in scrubs again, by choice this time, checking on patients, training new nurses, stopping at room 347 where a different veteran now lay recovering. An Army veteran, 61 years old, admitted for chest pain that the doctors had almost missed. Rachel placed her challenge coin in his hand. The tarnished metal caught the light. "You're not alone," she whispered. "You served. You survived. That means something." The word she'd needed to hear 18 months ago. The lesson learned. Do not pick a fight with someone who has nothing left to lose. If you made it this far, you already know the truth: the quiet ones matter most. The ones who seem invisible might be the ones holding everything together. Subscribe for more stories about the warriors walking among us, the ones working shifts you never see, healing wounds you don't know exist. Like this video, comment below with your thoughts, and share this with someone who needs to know they're not alone.